One, two, three. Is it even on a wrong paper? Is this the right paper? It's the right paper. I'm going blind. No. I think I was at page 20 before I stopped. Is NIWA sufficiently illuminated? This sounds like AI. I'll leave it for now. I tried to make a paper, and last time it used the word illuminating. I don't like it when it uses these big fancy words. It makes it sound way too important. This is just a paper on stress, a homework on burnout. There needs to be no like it's like big. You don't need to call it elegance or any of the sort. Just keep it plain, boring. Just keep it what it should be, a boring paper. But anyways, I doubt that this paper was written in 2022, 2021, stuff like that. AI wasn't really being used from what I know. I might be wrong. But yeah, it wasn't that common back in 2021. AI. Is NIW sufficiently illuminating? We suspect that despite the virtues of NIWA, some readers might worry that the view somehow fails to accomplish what a successful analysis is meant to accomplish. It's not entirely easy to make this worry more precise, but the general concern is that NIWA should be dismissed as illegitimate because it is in some way insufficiently illuminating. In this section, we shall consider some ways in which this objection can be made more precise and argue that none of them pose a problem for NIWA. A first possible charge is that NIWA is in a certain sense circular. Of course, NIWA is not circular in the sense that harm occurs both in the analysans. I'm going to look this up. I no longer shall I stutter on words that I don't know. What's the point of the speak session? I just try to use the speak section. Speak. Is it? Am I going crazy? But this ain't working. I thought this worked. Maybe I need to do the whole thing. Hey yo, I guess it doesn't. To Google I go. In philosophical analysis, I can't pronounce that. Pronunciation. Oh, brother. Oh, there you go. YouTube video.
Analyzing them.
I can't hear that. What?
Analyzing them.
What?
Analyzing them.
Analyzing them.
Analyzing them.
And
Analyzing them.
Analyzing them.
Analyzing them.
Analyzing them. Analyzing them. Analyzing them. Analyzing them. That sounds Jamaica. Where is it? Okay, so analysans and analyzer dome. But according to this objection, NIWA is nonetheless circular in the sense that saying that E negatively affects S or this event negatively affects a subject's well-being is just another way of saying that event or E harms S. In other words, according to this objection, that E negatively affects S well-being is just what it means that E harms S. Well, bruh, what? This kind of objection to a philosophical analysis is not uncommon, which is why we bring it up. But it is very popular, very peculiar. If E harms S and E negatively affects S well-being really do mean the same thing, then it's hard to see how this could speak against NIWA adequately rather than in its favor. Indeed, if NIWA is to work as a linguistic analysis of E harms S and E negatively affects S, contrary to 2012, page 393, NE, suggests that appeal to respects of well-being does not presuppose pluralism and well-being. For instance, an operation without which the subject should have been on a balance hedonically worse off might involve some painful experience that she would have otherwise been spared. I have no idea what that means, but it's okay. Well-being just means and E negatively harm S. Well-being must have the same meaning. This circularity charge then provides no reason to dismiss NIW. A slightly more sophisticated complaint is that it is rather negatively affects and harm that means the same thing, and that NIW therefore objectionably analyzes harm to S in terms of harm to S well-being. This would be comparable to suggesting that S knows that P means the same thing as S has a true belief that P that is caused in the right way. Where caused in the right way can in turn only be understood by reference to knowledge. Such a protest is unconvincing for several reasons. However, including the following three. First, negatively affects and harm do not mean the same thing, even if a poem cannot be harmed. For example, an ill-advised revision can still affect it negatively. Second, surely it's almost in loose sense harm that an event might be said to harm someone else's well-being, a sense that it is different from an arguably parasitic on that more familiar strict sense in which an event can harm an individual, where the letter is, of course, what NIWA like CA and CCA concerns. Saying that an event harms someone's well-being is like saying that her well-being suffers as a result of it. Third, comparing NIWA with the analysis of knowledge as true belief that is caused in the right way is misguided. For unlike the expression caused in the right way, the notion that figures in NIWA can, as we urged, we should be understood independently of the notion that NIWA seeks to analyze. The notion of negative influence is gain, familiar from elsewhere, see section 3, and surely unproblematic to analyze harm partially in terms of well-being. As seen NIWA, CA, and CCA do, it is at most in a harmless sense then that NIWA analysis harm in terms of harm. Another related objection is that NIWA is uninformative, or at least insufficiently informative. We would learn nothing of interest by learning that it is true, or at least everyone already knows that it is true. Indeed, the critic might contend that our elaborate defense of NIWA resembles Thomas Nagel's example of the absurd. I know this name. I swear I heard this before. Thomas, I know who this guy is. Is it the guy who talked about echolocation bats, and then he said what it is like to be that organism? Then he said something what it's like to be a bat. Am I right? I don't know. Insane pull if I'm wrong though. No, insane pull if I'm right though. Let's look him up. I'll just look him up. Am I gonna be right? If I am, I'm gonna be impressed. Oh, I am right. Nice. Insane. In fact, about consciousness nearly subjective and it can be fully grasped by a limited type of viewpoints. Is he dead? Is he dead? I just want to know. I'm curious. No, Thomas Nigel is not dead. Okay. 88 years old is insane. Bro was rocking it back in World War II. That's crazy. But, it's not that crazy, I guess. I only read about this guy. I didn't read anything about this guy. I think he was mentioned once in one paper I read some months ago, like 4 months ago. He was mentioned one time. Insane memory pull. I don't know how I did that. Resembles women. The critic might contend that our elaborate defense of NIWA resembles one of Thomas Nigel's example of the absurd, in which someone gives a complicated speech in favor of a motion that has already been passed. I guess it's not really an insane pull if I only know him for one thing, I guess. NIWA, the critic, might suggest does not itself teach us anything about harm. It is more plausibly seen as something that view like CA and CCA are attempts to elucidate further. In fact, however, NIWA tell us lots of interesting things. I need to zoom in. That's too far in. Okay, NIWA tells us a lot of interesting things about harm, including many things concerning which there is disagreement in the debate. To take just a few examples that we have touched on already, NIWA vindicates the idea that harm and well-being are closely related. It shows that harm has something in common with other kinds of negative influences, such as those that have to do with the economy, one's moral worth, and so on. It vindicates the normative significance of harm. It reveals that the attractive first thought seen See section 1 is not merely a good starting point for theorizing harm, but straightforwardly provides an analysis of this notion, and at least it implies that most leading views of harm, including CCA, counterfactual comparative account of harm, and causal account, are false, and thereby also rules out that those views can successfully elucidate NIWA. Further, since they are not even extensionally equivalent to NIWA, the self-glaze here is insane. I know this guy is smart, but Jesus Christ, man. I don't know. I'm getting jealous of this confidence. Rather than NIWA being insufficiently informative, then several important views of harm on the trivial should find it especially problematic for a view that conflicts with it. In addition, as we shall argue in the next section, NIWA also helps rebut Bradley's skepticism about the role of harm in serious theorizing. Moreover, note that NIWA does not exclude that the notion that it invokes to analyze harm can themselves be analyzed further. What? While we can, I'm just going to have to read through this again. So this is the final read through, but I'm going to read through it again because there's a lot of questions I have that I don't understand in this view. I'm back in ask GPT to give me a user research question to explain. I know. While we have not assumed any such analysis, it might be that the notion of well-being, say, can be analyzed in terms, for example, fitting attitudes, the subject's desires, or the flourishing of human beings. Such an analysis could compatibly there got to be some grammar. It can't be me. Okay, it probably is me. Compatible with NIWA shed further light on what harm is, and that goes of course, for the other central notion in NIWA, that of negatively influencing something. For this reason, there is also room in logical space for thinking that this notion can be analyzed in terms of either causal or counterfactual terms, and that NIWA thus might be compatible with the spirit, though not with the letter, of either CA or CCA. While we do not deny that there is such room, we do take the discussion in section 3 to provide strong reason to think such an analysis will nonetheless be very implausible. Thus, we suspect that this room in logical space is little more than that, just that. While none of the above objections seem to be successful, we do agree that there is nevertheless some sense in which the NIWA is comparatively less informative than CA and CCA. Elsewhere, we have speculated that no need an informative theory of harm can be true. Really? Okay. And although NIWA does not vindicate the speculation since it is neat and informative, it might be taken to come quite close. None of this, however, provides any reason to doubt its adequacy. If one hoped that a more informative analysis of harm would be true, NIWA might be dissatisfied. This might simply mean that we should adjust our expectations. 5. Bradley's skepticism. Again, some writers were in the debate. Now, most notably, Ben Bradley 2012 have expressed skepticism about the suitability of the notion of harm in ethical theorizing. What Bradley claimed is not that contrary to what it seems. We actually do not have prudential or moral reasons to avoid harming ourselves and others. His view is rather that the concept of harm is so ill-behaved that we should not state normative claims in terms of it all. In this section, we shall show how NIWA helps to deal with the skepticism. According to Bradley, the notion of harm is a Frankenstein jumble. While he does not explain what he means by this, we take his idea to be that harm is a gruesome and wildly disjunctive notion. For this reason, Bradley proposes that this notion is also unsuitable in serious ethical theorizing. His main ground for this messiness thesis about harm is that all existing non-messy accounts of harm, including primarily CCA and various versions of CA, face serious problems. In addition, Bradley also suggests that our judgment about harm are muddied by moralizing, in that we are more likely to call an act harmful if we think it is wrong, and proposes that this helps to explain why finding a plausible theory of harm has been difficult. Independently of NIWA, there's a lot to say about Bradley's reasoning here. One problem is that even if all existing accounts of harm fail, it is hard to see why this would suggest that the notion of harm is gruesome and disjunctive. For one thing, this conclusion does not sit well with a plausible unity. I gotta look this up. I don't know what word this is. It's been a long time since I've been stumped. Well, I just got stumped by a word called analazodome. I like learning about new words. I end up just paraphrasing them though.
Desideratum.
Holy macaroni. Desideratum.
Desideratum.
Desideratum. Something that is needed or wanted. Desideratum. Desideratum. It's not that hard. Desideratum. Atom. Desideratum.
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 Desideratum. Okay. Desideratum. Plausible unity desideratum that Bradley himself endorses, according to which an analysis of harm should explain what all harm have in common by locating a common core to harm. Moreover, some of Bradley's objections are that the account in question generates too much harm. For instance, he notes that CCA implies that Batman's action in No Clubs harms Robin and takes this to be problematic. As the more plausible verdict, he thinks, is that Batman's actions do not harm Robin. If this is indeed a problem for CCA, it obviously cannot be solved by adding further disjuncts to the counterfactual condition in that theory. That would lead to a view that generates more rather than less harm. What about the idea that some of our judgment about harm are muddied by moralizing and therefore unreliable? Contrary to what Bradley seems to suggest, this idea, if correct, should come as good news for the philosophers who want to give a non-messy analysis of harm. The reason is that this information about the causal influences on our judgment about harm may allow her to explain away some of those judgments when they conflict with her view, precisely on the ground that they are moralized and thus unreliable. Hence, if anything, Bradley's conjecture actually speaks against his messiness thesis about harm rather than it's in its favor. In this regard, Bradley's skepticism about harm differs from that example of Haltog 2002. What Haltog seeks to argue is that the concept of harm is unsuitable as such in its moralizing theorizing, but only that the moral importance of what it stands for is overstated, since no account of harm makes the Mill's so-called harm principle, according to which roughly the state may use to coercion only to prevent harm to others, plausible. This interpretation is supported by claims Bradley make in different contexts to the effect that a kind of pluralism about the concept of excellence implies about the concept is a gruesome, some disjunctive Frankenstein concept unsuitable for use in moral theorizing. Bradley 2007. At any rate, NIWA, which Bradley does not consider, is clearly not a disjunctive account. Moreover, as we have stressed, NIWA avoids the problems that CCA and CA face. Thus, because a plausible non-disjunctive account of harm can be given, Bradley's skeptical argument about the role of harm in ethical theory is unsuccessful. It is worth noting that there may of course be several different ways in which an event can negatively influence someone's well-being, and thus, if NIWA is true, several different ways in which an event can harm someone. For instance, as we have argued, some event harms a subject by causally influence their well-being negatively, whereas other time the relevant relation is grounded rather than causation. More specific and everyday distinctions can also be drawn. For instance, in some contexts we may want to distinguish between physically harming someone, example, negatively influence their well-being by punching them or kicking them, and psychologically harming them, i.e. negatively influence their well-being by making them feel humiliated, threatening them, etc. However, the fact that there are many different ways of negatively influencing someone's well-being does not suggest that the concept of negative influence on well-being itself is disjunctive. That would be like taking the concept of murder to be disjunctive, because there are many ways to murder someone. On the contrary, the concept of murder is a useful one precisely because it captures what many other wise, quiet, different events. That is, poisoning someone, pushing them outside of an airplane, locking them up without water for a sufficient long time, and so on. Have it in common that is roughly that they all involve intentionally and wrongly killing someone. Similarly, the fact that an event can negatively influence our well-being in many different ways, thus on an NIWA harms us in many different ways, is a reason to keep using the concept harm rather than abandoning it. Our related possible objection to NIWA might be that even though its analysis is at least not explicitly disjunctive, the relevant notion of negatively affecting one of its key elements failed to be metaphysically joined Carvin. I wish I knew like some of this stuff. I have no idea what metaphysically joined Carvin means. I don't even feel to look it up, but I'll look it up for the sake of my own sanity. Metaphysically joined Carvin. Let's get into this. What does this mean? I hope I don't get stuck in a rabbit hole. This is an AI summary. Okay, I'm gonna read it. Metaphysically joined Carvin refers to the idea that our most fundamental theories and concepts accurately reflects the object-independent structure of reality, much like a butcher carves meat along its natural lines. The metaphor, famously from Plato's blah blah, I don't know what that is, suggests that reality has pre-existing objective structures that are philosophical and scientific endeavors to strive to discover and map. Joint Carvin properties or concepts are those that perfectly capture these objective boundaries and divisions in the world, leading to accurate understanding of fundamental structures, according to metaphysicals like Theo Sider. It kind of reminds me of that one Aristotle thing, where it's like, oh, there's perfect forms and everything comes from a perfect form of that thing. But I know I'm way off. I'm really way off. I don't know. I'll look into it later. In some appropriate sense, for example, may fail to be metaphysically fundamental or to play any explanatory role in metaphysics. This could be taken to suggest that NIWA implies, in accordance with Bradley's skepticism, that the notion of harm is a gruesome one, which in turn renders it unfit for normative theorizing. This objection is unconvincing. However, even assuming that the relevant notion of negatively affecting does fail to be metaphysically joined Carvin, first, nothing in NIWA rules out that this notion can, in turn, be analyzed in terms of notions that are metaphysically joined Carvin. Secondly, and most importantly, if the notion of harm is suitable to normative theorizing, this is because harm is normatively significant. For instance, because we have prudential reason. I don't know. Oh my god. For instance, because we have prudential reason to avoid harm to ourselves and moral reason not to harm others, there is no reason independent of this to think that harm should be metaphysically significant or joined Carvin. And crucially, something needs not be metaphysically joined Carvin in order to be normatively joined Carvin, or otherwise normatively significant. After all, if the notion of pain turns out not to be metaphysically fundamental and to play no explanatory role in metaphysics, this is no threat to its central role in ethics. It's just an implausible ethical claim that pain's normative importance depends on its metaphysical importance. Its moral and prudential relevance is due to what it does to the sufferer rather than what it can do for the metaphysician. Oh, that line would have been perfect if I read it perfectly. Okay, prudential relevance. Such sweet words to my ears. I like certain words and how they come off the tongue. Like, but I don't like using too much big words. I like to keep everything I say very just mellowed, layman, nothing too like extra. I find that when people start spamming big words, without in a random set, let's say in a Roblox game, I just look at you cross-eyed like, what the, come on man, you know I don't understand a thing you're saying. Like I once talking about somebody, and they were bringing up Aristotelian souls or rational souls, whatever. And I just asked him, how are you going to verify this? It's just a really just simple question. He said through reasoning, and then asked me. He kept on saying, I can't remember the word. I should have recorded, through some sort of reasoning. I'm like, okay, what is this reasoning? And he just said, it's this reasoning. I'm like, what is the reasoning? And he just said, okay. And he said he had to go. I should have recorded, because it's a bit unfortunate that I don't get to learn about that stuff. At the end of the day, I just want to know more. The more I can engage with other views and learn about what they're talking about, the more I can learn about new stuff. And I like that. Oh, 2000, it just became Monday. Just 10 minutes ago. A bit late on that, but it's same. The same we submit should be said about harm. Its significant normative theorizing is independent of its significance to metaphysics. Concluding remarks. We have reached the end of the papers. Let's see how much we got. Wow, we really reached the end of this paper. I'm a bit sad, but it gives me an opportunity to look over what might have gone over my head. Yeah. Concluding remarks. In this paper, we have argued that NIAA is the most plausible view of harm, rebutted a class of likely objections to it, and registered some of its important implications. Dude, I don't know why I'm laughing. I swear to God, anytime I try to think of this harm thing through NIAA, all that comes to my head is that negative and positive well-being. Boom. Well, I know that's not what NIAA is talking about. I'm mixing what it said about in the previous paper I read on does abortion harm the fetus with this paper I'm reading right now, and I just feel like my head, I know what NIAA is. It quite literally gave me a whole description. I can try to butcher or try to paraphrase it right now, but I won't even try. But nonetheless, I think most of this has to be fixed through, unfortunately, GPT. I gotta ask one of those research questions. That's what I should do. One question that we have only briefly touched upon concerns the ground of the fact that adversely affecting someone's well-being. When E is negative influence on S well-being, then in virtue of what does this fact obtain? While a full-fledged treatment of this question is beyond the scope of the, oh my God, don't say the beyond the scope of paper. Every time is beyond the scope of this paper. I've read this like 4 times. Every time I want to get to the nitty and gritty of a paper, and it always has something like, it's not in the scope. One time they brought up coma patients and animals, and then the next breath they said, but it's beyond the scope of this paper to tell you about these things. Okay, like sometimes I want to know, it's not beyond the scope of this paper. Can you include an extra page? Why it has to be 28 pages or 15 pages? Why can't it be 16 pages? Just to explain those thoughts. Or could you like give me a link to all those those other papers you've explained this thing? Like, why are you leaving me with nothing? Just another thing to complain about. I'm just gonna give all my complaints while I'm out right here. A full-fledged treatment of this question is beyond the scope of this paper. But we suspect that the most promising answer to it is some form of particularism or pluralism. As we have emphasized, it is plausible that E sometimes negatively influence S well-being, at least partially in virtue of certain causal facts. Example, that E causes something that is intrinsically bad for S, sometimes at least partly in virtue of certain counterfactual facts. Example, that S would have been better off if E had not occurred, and yet other times, at least partially due in virtue of certain other metaphysical facts. That example, E is a constituent of something that is intrinsically bad for S. God, all of this sound the same. All of this sound the same. I just read the same two sentences because I don't understand what constituent. Okay, I don't understand what that is. While it cannot be ruled out that some neat and ununified principle about the grounds of negative influence facts that respects this plurality could be given, we also do not see any particularly strong reason to think that this might be yet another disappointing conclusion to certain readers, especially to those who have preferences for tidy philosophical analysis of the form to be F is to be G, where F and G are on the face quite different kinds of properties. It is thus worth closing on the question of what kind of doxastic attitude such disappointment might motivate. It is true that NIWA leaves many questions unanswered, both about harm and about the notion in terms of which its analysis harm. But it's surely a fallacy to reject an account on the sole ground that it does not immediately provide answers to certain questions, even if those questions are very important. One that concerns what that account is about. On the contrary, there's a thought. I want to look this up on field papers to see if anyone talks about NIWA. Maybe someone in 2025 talked about it. I have to look field papers up. I always got David Bowman as my first search in this stuff. All right, nobody talked about NIWA. That's unfortunate. Maybe, okay. The fact that it does not immediately provide answers to the questions might be reasons to keep investigating them and forming beliefs around them that are consistent and ideally supported by the account. But it's hard to see why it would be a reason to reject the account. The point just made can be contrasted with alternative lines of thought, according to which a correct analysis of harm would allow us to answer several controversial questions in normative ethics. This idea often seems to be taken for granted in the debate, though it is not always made fully explicit. For instance, some ethical questions that have been approached via the question of what harm is concerned and the non-identity problem, and other issues in procreate. Oh my God. I said procreation when it was procreative ethics. I am a terrible person. The moral significance of consent, Mill's harm principle, and the plausibility of various deontological doctrines, such as that of doing and allowing harm. Proverbs 2019. It would undeniably be a nice account of harm if we were to provide those answers to these questions, but it's no less undeniable that the truth is not always nice. So perhaps these questions must simply be settled on other grounds. Indeed, as we have stressed, we find it more likely that a correct analysis of harm will rather be one that makes sense of the widespread disagreement about exactly how and why, to what extent harm is morally important, and thus allows that many competing views about these issues can be viable. For very helpful comments, we are grateful to Eric Carlson and Victor Mulberg, participants in higher seminar and practical philosophy at Lund University and one area editor at 2 references for EGRO. Work for this paper was supported by a grant 2018, Jonathan, and 2020 to 1955, Risberg from Vetenskaparedet. I don't know how to pronounce that. That's the end of the paper.